Okay, before starting today's session, any doubts?
No, Venkat.
Okay, you Ravali?
Oh, Venkat.
Okay, okay. Then today we will start with the output table component. So, whenever we wanted to, once we extract and transform the data and create the load ready files, we have to load the data into the database. So while loading the data into the database, we have a component called output table component. We can use this component and then load into the tables. But how effectively you are loading the data is the main concern here. So in place of extraction, what are the considerations we have taken place? It just doesn't mean that you extract the data as per our wish. We have to make sure the extraction process should go smoothly. We should not put the load onto the OLTP systems. So similarly, while taking a load into the database of the, it could be a data warehouse or in the data mart, but we have to make sure that again we should not put a load onto the data warehouse. The loading part also should go more effectively. So how can we make sure? So that's something we will discuss now. And coming to the parameters, we have like a filter preference here as well. So here we have like three values as we discussed in the input table component, like delimiter, variable, and fixed. So while generation of the GML, what kind of the preference you have to set for each of the records, whether it's a DML, sorry, whether it's a delimiter or a variable or a fixed size. If you're selecting a delimiter, then you have to give what is the delimiter for your columns. That is, has to be set in the parameter called column delimiter. And this delimiter can be set at multiple places. One of the parameter is a column delimiter, and if you don't want to set, if you are setting here, then it will be like the scope of this delimiter, whatever you are going to set is belongs to only this component. No, I have to change my scope according to the environment. So in such a case, you have to set the delimiter in a variable configuration variable called ab underscore idb underscore column delimiter. So if you are setting it according to the environment, the delimiter can be changed. It should be only once. So there is some other place also which you can set the delimiter. I will let you know soon. Along with these two places. And we have a parameter called rows per commit. So this parameter will ask like after processing how many records you want to apply a commit in the database, and this parameter comes available only when you set. And before discussing this, in input table component, something we discussed about API mode. Can you tell me which parameter we have this value?
Mm, so, Venkat?
In previous session while discussion with input table component, something we discussed about
Mm,
API mode. So can you guys tell me where which parameter hold a value called API?
I thought you said Aura interface.
Yes, exactly correct. So
That's
in the
the
input table
Oracle.
component, in the input table component, we have a parameter called Aura interface, and the only value or the default value it contains is API. So similarly, for the output table component, we have a parameter Aura interface, and the values we have is like API and utility mode. So in the output table component, we have two values, API and utility. But this rows per commit will be available when you select Aura interface as utility mode. And if you are selecting API, then the parameters will be like commit number. Meaning is same, but the parameter names differs. It depends on the parameter value for Aura interface, whatever we are going to select. So the rows per commit, how many records after processing it, whether it's a successfully processed or some of the records getting rejected, both will taken into consideration. Let's say I have set 1000 as a value rows per commit. So in that only 800 rows got processed successfully and 200 gets rejected. Still, it processed 1000 records. So after processing 1000 records, a commit will happen. And similarly for commit number as well. So, and one more thing, I don't want to commit any of the records in middle. I want to commit after loading whole data in the file. So in such a case, you have to give 0. So by giving that 0, in middle it never commits it till it completes the whole load, then it commits the database. And if you're giving in place of commit number any positive values like what I said 1000, so in such a case definitely you have to give a value in the commit table. So here whatever the table name we are giving here is not the target table name. Let's say I have a loaded file which is loading into department table. So that target table name is something different, and the table name what we are supposed to give in the commit table is different. Here we are not loading the data into this commit table. It is just for a tracking purpose. So for whatever we have loaded, I have 1 lakh records. I'm keep getting loading into after 10,000 records. I have given 10,000 as my commit number. So for every 10,000 records, the committing will be happening with. So one second. So for every 10,000 records, the commit will be happening each. So let's say the graph has failed after processing 68,000 records. So now it's turned to 60,000 to 70,000 records loading it, and then commit should happen after 70,000 records complete. Now the graph has failed due to some reason. So, and till 60,000 records already the commit has been happened. In such a case, if you are restarting the job from the point of the failure, then it has to take from 60,001 to 1 lakh records. It's not from 1 to 1 lakh, because if you are again loading it, you have to something take care the steps in the table like deleting the data from 1 to 60,000. No, that we will not take care. So you set the commit table, then automatically it will take care of loading from 60,001 to 1 lakh records. So that is something it will take the status of the load. So for whatever the records it has been loaded. And then we have a parameter called ignore duplicates. So this is available again in the API mode. Whenever you are setting the Aura interface as an API, then this parameter becomes available. And whenever you are setting to the true for this parameter, ignore duplicates, means you're letting the component know that you ignore the duplicates when the duplicates comes, like whichever the unique constraints or the primary constraints violating that records or like ignore like duplicates. So we want to ignore that duplicates by setting this parameter as a true. So what will happen is these records will be discarded rather than sending to the reject port. Means we are telling to the component that you discard these such kind of unique constraint violation records. So that is the reason instead of these records will be discarded rather than sending to the reject port. If it is a false, then it will send the values or the records to the reject port. And these are the common parameters to whichever the database you are going to connect. These parameters will be available. And if you are connecting with the Oracle database, then we do have like direct mode. So what this direct parameter will say is what kind of the load you have to apply. So what kind of the load in the sense whether it's a direct load or a conventional load. So by setting this direct to the true, the behavior will completely change. So let's say I have 1 lakh records. So to load that 1 lakh records internally, it has to select the complete memory wherever it can fit all these 1 lakh records. Internally again it has to load into the blocks and the segments. So whichever the block which can fit this complete 1 lakh records in that block, it has to choose and then load into the data. And if you are loading the data in the conventional mode in the database, all the blocks and the segments will not be fitted correctly. There will be some of the spaces between these. So in the conventional load, it will identify the segments which are the free and then keep filling these segments one by one. So then once all these segments have been filled up, the empty segments wherever we have a spot, then whatever the remaining load is there, that will be placed into one of the blocks and the segments where we have an empty space. That is how internally these operations will be performed for a direct load or the conventional load. But always the direct load will be a faster than the conventional one, because it no need to select or search for the segments, free segments in all the blocks. And then we have a parameter called Aura interface. So here we have two values, as I said, API and utility mode. So this is very important question. Many interviews people will be asking like what is API and utility mode. So how we have selected with the direct mode true or false, and then the load is happening in the conventional or the direct load. Similarly, a lot of difference is there for Aura interface, API as well as utility mode. So if you're selecting Aura interface as an API mode, and whatever the constraints you have in the table, a record by record, it will be getting loaded into the database. And once it's a once the one of the record which got loaded into the database satisfies the constraints in the table whatever we have, then only the next record will get loaded. And again the same constraints for each of the field whatever we have, all the constraints will be checked. Once again the second record satisfies, and then third record will get loaded and again keep checking it. So this process will be looping till all the records we have in the load ready file and getting loaded into the database. So this is a time consuming process for the API mode. If any one of the record gets rejected, all the records will get rejected. Again it depends on the values we are setting at the commit number or the commit table or the rows per commit. And if you are selecting utility mode, this is a bit faster than the API mode. The reason is we have to follow utility. The reason why it is faster is we will be disabling the constraints before the load. Once we read the data into the output table component, we will be disabling the constraints in the table and loading the data. It's like 1 lakh records if you are getting, let's say 1,000 records or 5,000 or 10,000 records. A dump of the records will be loading into the database. Once a dump has been loaded, then we are enabling the constraints. So all these records, whatever the dump has been loaded, all the records will check the constraints at a time. So any of the constraints is not satisfying, the records will get rejected and the load will fail, depends on the settings of the other parameters. If all the satisfies, then again once again we are loading the dump of the records. By disabling the constraints, load will happen, and enable the constraints, all the constraints will be checked for each of the records. So this is how the faster we are getting it. So the load will be so faster in case of utility than the API. This is the difference between the API and as well as utility mode. and then we have a parameter called bind size. So this parameter actually we have in the SQL loader utility. So whatever the value we are setting it in the parameter of the output table component for bind size, that value will be sending to the SQL loader utility. So why do we require this? Is before saving the records in the database, what is the buffer size a SQL loader is required? That is what it says. So even the SQL loader has to read the data from the file and send the records to the database. So in before sending the records to the database, what is the size of the amount of the memory it required to hold these records? So that is what it says. And then we have a parameter called native options. So in this native options, we will be sending the values like whether this load should happen in a multi-threading process, or like index should be maintained or not, or what is the streaming size. All those values parameters we can set it. So we can say like a skip index maintenance. If you set it as a true for this parameter, the index maintenance will not be happening each. Depends on the table tabs, we have to set the values whether you want to maintain the index or not, or it should be loading in a multi-threading or not, and what could be the streaming size like buffer size. So all those options we can set it in the native options. And we have a parameter called partition name. So do you remember like something similar to the partition name we discussed in the input table component? What is the parameter? The behavior is something similar to the partition name of the output table component and the input table component, but the parameter name is slightly different. Okay, so that is include partitions. So in case of input table component, for the parameter include partitions, whatever the partition names we specify, from there we are going to unload the data. Similarly here, whatever the partition names we are going to specify here in the output table component, directly we can load the data into specific partitions also. So that is the difference. Then we have a component called run SQL. So as I said, like any of the command we can execute in the run SQL. And here also we will be having like Aura interface as API or utility. And if you're dropping a table, we have a parameter called ignore drop table errors. So if you're not setting it to true, then the graph will fail. If the table does not exist and if you're trying to drop a table, then an error will come. And if you are setting it to true, then definitely the graph will fail. Otherwise, if you set it to false, it just gives an information. And the important parameter where the information has to be retrieved is a parameter called SQL file. So what all the commands you want to execute it, all the commands you place it into one of the file and read it in the SQL file. And once you run the component the graph with the SQL, the run SQL component, all those commands will get executed. So this is a simple component, but we can do any SQL command get executed here, whether it's a DML command or a DDL command. And then we have a component called update table. So here the parameters we will be having is like update SQL file and insert SQL file. So in update SQL file, as the name says that we have to give like update statement, and in the insert SQL file we have to give insert statement. But we have to give update and insert only. But if you are going to give any of the statement also, it will just execute it, because it will not be knowing what kind of the statement you are giving it. Whatever we give, it will get executed in both of these parameters. But the first parameter is going to execute is the update SQL file parameter. And if something fails over there, means let's say we have written an update statement and nothing of the record gets updated, then only the record, the parameter insert SQL file will get executed and the record will be inserted by using an insert statement here. So that is how generally we follow. If update fails, then insert has to be done. And here also we have like commit number and commit table. Commit table, both the parameters we have it. And we have a parameter called update SQL only once.
Venkat?
Yeah, Ravali.
Can you once again explain the commit number and commit table, please?
Yeah, sure. So if you are specifying the commit number as a 0, then no need to specify a value for commit table, because we are telling to the component that once the complete load has been happened, then only you do the commit. In between, never the commits will happen. But if I'm specifying any positive values, then definitely I need to specify a commit table. The reason is, so let's say I specify the commit number as a 10,000. I have in the file 1 lakh records. So 10 times the commit should happen. So first time after processing of the 10,000 records, a commit will happen. And this commit table is not the target table what we are going to load. This is just for an internal purpose where we can hold the status of the load. So once it has been processed, let's say 80,000 records are successfully processed and remaining 20,000 records are there. Let's say any database issue or the data issue or the graph issue, the graph has been failed in middle without loading the next 20,000 records, the remaining 20,000 records. So again, these 80,000 records are already committed in the database. If I restore the process from the beginning, there will be a duplicates of 80,000 records and the graph will fail, ignoring the duplicates. Or that depends upon the settings, we have to make sure. But that is not the right process, because the 80,000 records getting rejected, we can do that, but that is not the right process. And again, deleting the data before running the graph in the table, that is also not the right process. So something it has to be taken care automatically. So that will take care using commit table. It will hold the status so for whatever the records we have loaded, from where again it has to start it. So it will start again from the 80,001 record. So you no need to take care anything automatically, and this will take care. You no need to delete the records in the tables, or once you correct the problem what it was failed, then automatically you can restart the process. That is what the advantage of the commit table. And then we have, is it clear, Ravali?
Yeah, yes, Venkat.
Okay, yeah. Then we have a parameter called update SQL only once. So in the update table component, along with the input port, we have like SQL port. So this parameter says if you are setting it to update SQL only once to true, then first time whenever the component runs this port, whatever it get connected, the file that will get executed. No, if you are setting it to true, then after every commit this parameter will get executed. So in this case 9 times the commit will happen. The 10th time is an auto commit. So whenever there is a commit happening, once all the records has been loaded, then auto commit will be happening it. But so for like 1 lakh records, 10,000 completed, then 10,001 record read, then a commit, explicit commit is happening it because we specified this value. So once all the records have been loaded, then automatic commit will happen. In such a case, like update SQL only once is false means whenever the commits are happening this statement should be get executed. So that is your requirement something, then you can set it to the false, and whatever the uh, statements that get connected to the SQL port will be keep executed every time the commit is happening and we have a parameter called action required. So the default is true for this. So what it says is you are sending a records to the update table component and the first parameter is going to execute is update SQL file. Means I will be writing an update statement in that to update some of the fields in the database. But if whatever the values we have in the table and the same values we are going to update it again, then it doesn't mean that the values are updating in the table. The same values we have it already. So it's like no data in the database was modified. Then in such a case, by setting this action required to the true, these records will be rejected instead of sending to the unused report. So action required takes like those records will be sending to the reject port. If you are making it to the false, those records will be treated as unused records. So here also we have like input port, SQL port, then unused reject error log port and one log port. So this unused record, whenever you are setting to the false action required, the record will be sending to the unused port. Otherwise, it will get rejected and sent to the reject port. And then we have a component called a truncate table. Again, this is a very small component. You just have to specify the table name and that table will get truncated and it will be auto commit. You cannot never roll back it once it gets executed. What kind of the table you have to truncate it and in which mode interface? Again, it's API or utility. And so far we discussed all the components like input table, output table, run SQL, truncate table, update table components. Each of the component we know what it will do and we will be going into practicals. So you have any doubts before going to the practicals? Ravali and Bhagresh, any doubts?
No, Venkat. Can
You
you
got,
No,
scroll down?
Venkat, one thing.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, tell me Bhagresh.
Yeah, Venkat, as you said that utility is more faster than API, right?
Yes, yes.
So then, in which case we will go for API more?
So there will be like a staging tables and in the target tables we don't maintain any constraints. It depends on the project and the architects. So some projects which I've seen, there was a constraints even in the target table, but better thing is maintain at the staging tables and do a load with the API mode. Then once you load the data into the staging tables, you are pretty much sure that all the constraints have been checked already for the data which is getting loaded into the target, right? So again, from loading from the staging to the we cannot say even staging, that is intermediate tables we will be having so while loading from in those tables to the target tables, so you put it into
Mm.
utility mode, then whole bunch of records will get loaded. If you are checking the time constraint also, while first time whatever the tables we are getting loaded it, that will take some minutes of the time, but here just a fraction of the seconds, the load will be very faster.
Okay.
Any other doubts?
No, Venkat.
Okay, so I have two doubts. I was telling you whenever I connect to the Oracle database, these are the parameters will be available. So where am I specifying where in which parameter I need to select Oracle, or it's a DB2, or it's a Teradata, or it's a Netezza. So that I have not specified in any of the component, whichever I'm telling. Always I'm telling to the parameters like Oracle. So
Yeah.
that is
Uh,
something like we have a parameter called dbms. So
yeah.
we have a parameter called dbms. So that parameter we have to select what kind of the database we are connecting to. One second, be online. Okay, so we will be specifying the value to which database we are going to connect through the parameter dbms. And is something else again missing, or everything gets covered?
Config file.
Yes, absolutely right. So we have a components in the Abinitio, and database is somewhere it gets installed. We are telling to the component through to which database we have to connect it. We specified it using the DBMS. And how are we connecting from Abinitio to the database? So we have a config file, that is .dbc files we will be. So make a note, this is database configuration file. So we will be having multiple database configuration files. It specifies with which user ID and password to which database we are going to connect it. And these are the two parameters, all the components we will be having for the database. What is the database you are going to connect, and what is the configuration file? So all the configuration files will be saved with extension .dbc. So far we discussed the graph will be saved as .mp, and record formats will be .dmls, and transformations will be .xfr, and now we are discussing a configuration file, database configuration file, that is .dbc. So now we will see how this a configuration file will look for. Okay. So here we have to specify what DBC file or the database configuration file we are selecting it. So what are the possible values we have to minimum things we should be knowing in the DBC file. So select and configuration file button and go to edit if you have already selected the DBC file. So here the first thing is to which system you are going to connect, what kind of the database, the DBMS is. Now we have selected Oracle because we have Oracle software get installed here. And once you selected the DBMS as a Oracle, and what is the version of that Oracle, the version number you have to specify, and where the database has been installed, the DB home. Make a note of these parameters because in interviews again people will be asking it. What all the parameters you will be setting in the DBC file? One is DBMS and the DB version, DB home, and DB name, what is the database name, and username, password, and the DB nodes, and username, password. So here I have set it directly the Spot and Tiger as username and password, but in real time it will be parameterized. What is the username for this DBC file, and the password also will be parameterized, and that the parameterized value will also be encrypted format, not just direct the value we are going to give it in the parameter. It will be encrypted. And one more thing, what I said, the column delimiter, here also we can set it, the column delimiter. So for like within the parameter we can set it, or ABIDB column delimiter, a configuration variable we can set it, or in the DBC file also we can set it. What is a column delimiter? And there will be many things which we don't require to know. So these are the 7 to 8 definitely we have to know. DBMS, DB version, DB home, DB name, DB nodes, username, password, and column delimiter. And you can even test. Here we don't have actually, but in the real version we have that option to test it also. Let me connect to the database. So here, so already we have 16 records. Let me delete this. No row selected, and even we have done the commit. So I have a file which already gets created, and here we have 14 records, and now the table is empty. So instead it has to load into EMP table. Let me run this graph. So here we can take it as a load ready file and get loaded into the table. So the load is happening. We got it, all the 14 records. It's completed. So far we have 14 records. And let me unload the data from the table to the file. So using input table component, we are unloading the data which whatever we have loaded down is unloading into the file. Yes, we got it, all the 14 records, whatever we have loaded. And if you want to update, so let me check what is the value we have it. So three fields are there: employee number, name, and department number. So for employee number 7934, for 7934 currently CL1E or K is there, and we are updating with something, a delimiter here. This is, and for department number 10, so he belongs to department number 10, and employee number is also satisfying. So we will be updating this record. So let's see. It's completed. Yes, the record gets updated. Before it was 1E or K, now with a delimiter it got appended. And then we will discuss run SQL. So okay, here we have a drop table name. It's a DDL statement. So before going for this, we'll discuss a truncate table, so that the records will get deleted, all the records. So in the truncate table and DBC config table name, so we want table EMP to be truncated. So currently we have 14 records here. Once this gets completed, it's done. So no rows selected. Even if you do rollback is completed. Nothing. So it's like auto commit. Whatever the graph you're running with the components, it's an auto commit. So once that it has been completed, you never can roll back. So be careful whatever the records you are deleting or changing any of the database. And now even I can execute select store from EMP, so it got no rows selected. So let me execute the run SQL component. In this we can execute any of the SQL statement. So here we are executing a drop table names in the SQL file. So now we are dropping the table itself. Completed. So again I'm executing the same select statement whatever it has been executed previously. So it is saying the table or view does not exist, means the run SQL got executed and drops the table EMP. So is it clear?
Yeah, Venkat.
Okay, you Ravali?
Yes, my good.
Okay, yeah. And the next one,
Venkat,
yeah, Bhagat.
one query. For example, in my case, I have seen few graphs. What they will do is that they will simply select star from table.
Okay,
Okay. And in delimiter, they won't give all the columns which are present in the table. So they will provide only few columns only.
the
Then
delimiter.
in that case, yes.
So you're saying that a select store from table name. So all the fields we have, whatever we have in the data in the table, all the fields will get extracted.
but it's not extracting. Suppose there are 10 columns,
okay,
they are picking up only 5 columns.
they are,
They are defining 5 columns in delimiter, I mean DML.
but they are selecting 10 columns, you mean?
Yeah, 10 columns.
No, that will not possible.
I've seen in my case, it's working.
No, definitely it's not possible. If they are selecting it while generation of the DML itself, it will get the DML generated with the 10 fields.
Mhm.
Definitely that will not be possible. If they are selecting 10 fields from the database and the DML is only with 5 fields, no.
Okay.
You recheck it once again. If something you are missing it, then we will discuss that.
Yeah, actually, I had rechecked that.
Because definitely it's not possible actually. There will be
Yeah,
some
someone says
logic.
that based on. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Someone says that like based on DML fields, it will pick up if you can give select star from table like that.
Based on DML fields,
It will pick up the data from this table.
no, maybe in the
Just
select
it will.
directly they might have given 5 fields. Otherwise, just by defining store and here only 5 fields when the table has 10 fields, no, that will not be possible.
Mhm. Okay.
You recheck it
Okay.
and once you get clarified, then we will discuss it, Bhagirath, because whatever so far you said with this information, definitely not possible.
Okay. Okay. I will check it once.
Yeah, yeah. And then we have a next concept is parallelism. So tomorrow we will start with this concept, parallelism. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Ravili and Bhagirath.
Yeah. Thanks, Vimli.